Maple 101, beginners, what are we doing? It would take weeks. It would take what is in a manual that is now out of print. Joe has one of these on the table over there. He told me that it's been sold. It was the last one. So we've got to do everything that's in this maple syrup manual, and we have to do it in now 33 minutes. As Jesse indicated, I am a sugar maker. I was a research professor, teaching research professor for a lot of years. I have 40 years in the academy. I finished my last 20 years on the dark side. I was in the administration, and my last appointment was 10 years or 14 years as Dean of the College of Science in the Pennsylvania State System at a school in Edinburgh, south of Erie. I've done maple research all my life. Our family has made syrup in Western New York since 1848, all but 2 years since 1848, and we have recorded records back that far. It would be a really interesting talk if I could bring some of the papers and some of the bills that they kept and the receipts back when they were getting less than $2 a gallon for syrup at World War I time. You'll see some of that equipment in my slides in this presentation if we ever get to that. But with that 165, 70-year history in maple, we're pretty sure they made it before 1848, but we're also pretty sure they didn't know how to read and write or didn't have a pencil, one of those things. But the records stop in 48. But nevertheless, this is an old industry, and I like coming here. I worked with some of you folks. Some of you had me in Wisconsin last year at the annual meeting, and I was embarrassed to tears riding back to Buffalo with a cheese hat on. But, and they said it was a nice day in Wausau, Wisconsin. It was 19 below zero, and they said it was warm. And they still make syrup there. But I've been here to northeastern Iowa and fell in love with some of the woodlots. Brian Wolf's woodlot, we did a demonstration there. And this is important for those of us in the traditional maple region to have folks like you who are either in the industry, have been in the industry as a family operation or even some larger operations. And this is where the market is, to be honest with you. I have an ulterior motive. I think that it's important that every one of you establish a market in Des Moines, in Minneapolis, in parts south in Missouri, and parts west in Nebraska. I don't care where it is. Just don't try to sell syrup in New York and Vermont. We've got the place saturated, for goodness sakes. Let's move down along the East Coast and south. I'd be a little careful of one state way in the west on the left coast, but we'll get to that later on over lunch and when I'm not mic'd up. But nevertheless, let's talk about beginning, and there's no easy way to do this. A quick show of hands now that the lights are off. How many of you are now making syrup on more than one tap? Okay, now you keep your hands down. How many of you want to? Are you all crazy? Now, Jesse said some people are coming in late. They're probably out deer hunting. And if they come in with blood on them, that means that either they've gotten Bambi or they told their wife they were coming to a maple conference and she hurt him. So you've got to be a little crazy to make maple syrup. So with that codicil and with that warning, let's talk about the basics in the beginning. If I can figure out how to run this thing. There is any of a number of pieces of equipment you can use. I like starting my talks with something like this. We actually use this. This was my great-grandfather, Jesse's great-great-grandfather's finishing kettle. Bless you. You ought to get that taken care of. There again. Bless you. They finished syrup on this after they had finished boiling sap on 5 large cauldrons on stone arches. I don't suggest that you start out this way anymore. If you want to have a demonstration and have people come to your Sugarbush to see how heritage food products are made, this is a great way to do it. And get your grandchildren to tend the fire and lie to people through their teeth. This is how we make syrup. It works because it will draw people to a fire. It smoke, whatever, and then you liquor them all up on sugar and maple cream and things like that. It does work. Now, we're going to jump right into this, and I'm going to switch back and forth between plastic tubing and modern methods, metal spiles, galvanized buckets. A couple of take-home messages that are only going to be on this taped part because I don't really have them up here for Jesse to send out as part of the webinars or the electronic means of information. You've got to promise me, all of those of you who are now making syrup or want to make syrup, do not put anything in your sugar house, your sugar bush, that you wouldn't let your granddaughter or your baby daughter lick. Got it? This is a food product. It's a concentration food product. The thing that makes ice run through my veins is to walk into a sugar house, and I'm going to show you some pictures of some of these, I think, in here, and to see a galvanized 50-year-old milk can, a 10-gallon milk can. Every one of you who have a farm that you've got some sitting in the corner of your tool shed, they haven't been used in forever. They make a nice, well, it has to be okay. We put milk in it. Yeah, those are lead. That's Turniplate, unless you happen to have some of the really expensive stainless steel ones. Those are okay. Another thing that really freezes me over is to walk in and see people gathering in a plastic pail that says automatic transmission fluid. Or, and I've seen them all, I've got photographs, I document these things. Driveway sealer. Man, that gives syrup a nice flavor. Little on the dark side, but just that really nice petrochemical that you want to get. And you never get a leak through your gut when you're doing that. Another one, very common, is the drywall plaster pails. You got to use them for, we can wash those out. Bullpucky, you can't wash those out. Throw them away, recycle them. Don't put them in your sugar house or take them to Vermont and let them use them in their sugar house. All right? Don't use these things. Keep in mind, this syrup that's going to come out of that evaporator, whether it's the cauldron kettle, whether it's coming out of that spile into a bucket, is going to go in someone's granddaughter's mouth. All right? Lead is a real problem in our industry, and it has been, especially for new producers, those who want to get into the industry. Dealers like Joe and others will not sell old pans. If you find somebody on Maple Trader or Maple News or in the Des Moines Register that's selling a swell deal on a really nice English tin pan, walk the other way. Or go to the hardware and buy, and I'll show you later on, a lead test kit. Lead, there should be no lead, and I'll talk about lead in a little while here. Okay, most of the industry today has gone to plastic tubing, food-grade plastic tubing. Joe's got it over here on the side. We've got tools for putting it together. It's incredibly cost-effective. You can buy an old galvanized pail and a lid and a Sewell spout or a Warner spout that was used for the last 50 years. Joe can correct me when he's talking about equipment, but I think you can get a good deal if you buy that whole set for about $7.50 for a 50-year-old pail. Don't use them. I'm sorry. The people who are selling used buckets, and there are a million of them available out there, are selling something that they can't and should not use. So for less than 25 cents, you can buy a one-time use insert spile, change it out every year, it's food grade, and you're good to go. Okay, it's important when you're tapping trees to use food grade equipment. Stainless steel spiles are a good thing. If my pointer works, this is not stainless steel. This is an old Grimm spout. It's English tin. You're probably not going to have a problem with it because One thing, early season sap is cold. I wouldn't use it if you had a chance to use stainless steel or one of these or plastic. I would use it over these. They're pretty decent spouts. They can be gotten for a little bit, but I still would go with the plastic. And those of you on this side, I'm talking about this spout right here. You drill a hole in a tree. It's a good thing that if it's a maple tree. Another good thing, it probably ought to be alive. Now, you laugh, you chuckle. It's amazing.
I've done it.
Jesse was famous for tapping hickory trees, which look a lot like maple trees, especially before they get their heavy bark on it. He's known for tapping a telephone pole at one point in time. And a kid helping us came along and hung a bucket on it, but we didn't get much sap out of that, and the creosote was a little strong anyway. But nevertheless, it helps if it's alive. It helps if it's a maple tree. I would recommend that in my area of the world that you tap sugars and black maple. I do tap some red maple. I didn't used to, but with the advent of reverse osmosis, if I've got a line going by a soft maple tree, I'll put a spile in it. Simply because sugar is sugar is sugar. What I'm talking about here, for those of you who are really new in this, is the sap that comes out of the tree the end of February through the month of March has a sugar content of anywhere from just a little bit over 0, and those are the years we don't like, up to, and you folks are working with some high sugar content silver maples, which we burn as firewood in the East. And would never admit that we would ever tap a silver maple. But Jess is working with some things, silvers, riparian silvers, that are sugar contenting 2.8, 3, 6, he's telling me. I think he's lying through his teeth. But other than that, lending to exaggeration, that's not uncommon in some of the sugar maples and the black maples. What are we talking about? The rule of thumb in the industry is most trees, if you can get 2% sap or 2 degrees Brix, shout it out. How many gallons does it take of 2% sap to make 1 gallon of syrup? Anybody awake here? 40, 43 exactly. It's called the rule of 86. So if you've got 4%, you're now down to what? 12, 14%. Or 14 gallons, 15 gallons, a little more than that, to make 1 gallon of syrup. So the higher the sugar content, the better you are on energy savings. Okay, I've already talked about that. The first, it's got to be alive. It ought to be a maple tree. The old rule of thumb is that the tree diameter at breast height, 4.5 feet above the ground, should be about the size of a dinner plate, 10 inches DBH. They're tapping trees much smaller than that today with the so-called health spouts. Health spouts now, the old rule of thumb was a 7/16. Jesse's got a plank up here where those tap holes that you see over here to my left, your right, are at least a ½ an inch. I've got some cookies of some 200-year-old trees where they actually square tapped them, used wooden spiles, and used actually a chisel to tap. But now we're tapping with 5/16 or 19/64" bits. At lunchtime, you can come up and see some of these things. I brought a couple of bits with me. One of the greatest things since night baseball is, and this has a light on it so I can see my notes, is you now carry an 18 or a 20 volt, or if you really get, for Christmas, get the 60 volt DeWalt's. They last a long time. And get the 4.8 amp hour batteries, and we can get about 400 taps per battery with this thing. That's a whole lot better on the human body than lifting a gas tapping engine, or God forbid using a chainsaw like they used to use in the past, with a chainsaw fitted with a chuck, walk up to a tree and whack it with a chainsaw. You can use a hand bit and brace if you need to, but I don't know why you would if you have an electric handheld battery operated drill. You're tapping in cold weather. One point that you want to keep in mind is, you can read, I refuse to read things to people. You want to be careful tapping. I start tapping shortly after the first of the year. I have to now. We thought that we were doing well to be tapped by Valentine's Day. If I had waited until Valentine's Day to finish tapping in the last 2 years, 3 years, I would have missed probably a third of my season in western New York. We're 30 miles east of Buffalo. That 7 feet of snow that 3 years ago that everybody knows Buffalo had, that would be me. We had lines that I never found until after the end of the season. We just simply cut them off and didn't use them. We had drifts of snow on the west side of the woods that were monumentally deep. So getting back to tapping, if you're tapping in frozen wood, be extremely careful in driving the spile. It's okay to tap it, tap in about 1 3/4 inches, 2 inches maximum. If you're awake for my next talk just before lunch, we're going to talk about the inside of the tree. You're tapping into about, and I'm not so sure here in Iowa and Wisconsin and Illinois, but in my area of the world, 1 3/4 inches is about 10 years of the most recent growth. So you're cutting through about 10 years of growth. Keep in mind, once you wound that tree in that place, it will never continue to produce sap for the rest of the life of that tree. Keep that in mind. You start tapping a 5 or 6 inch tree, which I wouldn't suggest, you're going to run out of tap zone by the time you get done doing your sequential tapping around the tree up and down the distance of your drop line. So keep that in mind and do not over tap. In times past, I used to hang on an 18-inch tree, I would tap twice. Today on our 3,600 taps in my woodlot, I have, out of 3,600 taps, probably fewer than 200 of those are double tap trees. I have 2 3-tap trees, and they're about 3.5 feet in diameter. We've proven that over the years on a 5/16 inch hole, I'll get as much sap out of a single vacuum drop line as I would out of the second tap. You don't get twice as much sap out of the tree, and you've done more than twice the wounding damage over time. Tubing systems are really great. I have just under 25 miles of tubing on my 3,600 tap operation on about 40 acres of hardwood lot. Jesse's going to talk about loading and spacing of trees. Remember, these are wild grown, although we do have a planted orchard. I'll be 85 years old the first year that we tap that. I have them in straight lines, so my wheelchair will go right down by them. Not a problem. Motorized wheelchair, not a problem at all. But in a wild-grown woodlot, we release, we thin, and I aim for, and Jesse and I disagree on this, I aim for about 70 trees per acre mature. That would give you about 24 feet on center. This is a nice woodlot. It's a fairly young woodlot. That tree right in front of you with the drop line hanging down is probably about 75 years old. We have extremely fertile soils. In my area of the world, most people are nuking their woodlots and planting $3 a bushel corn there. So we're not a whole lot smarter in the East than most of agriculture is in the rest of the world. A nice woodlot, not a lot of regeneration, and we'll talk about that if we have some time later on. Now, tubing needs to be cleaned. A big problem in cleaning maple operations is, and in my operation, my big nemesis, and you'll see it in a little while, is squirrels. I have a little problem with deer knocking things down. We do have some porcupines, but squirrels are my nemesis. There are so many squirrels, so few recipes. And I always thought it was reds and chippies, but it's not. It's gray squirrels, and they usually will attack the tubing at the last one, the last line, or at the junction, at the union or the multi-fit, where the lines come into the mainline system. We've had them, they'll even eat the mainline system. When Jesse was at home, we replaced 9,000 feet of tubing in about 3 days with all of its drop lines. It's a monumental amount of work, a lot of cuss words, which we won't use in this place of worship. I can tell you later what some of those words are, but I think you probably already know most of them. but went back a week later and had to replace it again. An important point, if Jesse doesn't talk about it, is to remove the nut trees from your woods. You don't want to have hickories and beeches and hemlocks if indeed you don't want to have squirrels. It will bring them in. Working land, they'll bring corn in. It is a problem. And again, off mic, I'll tell you how we take care of some of them. Used to put mainline wires around the tree with a hose or wood on the back side of the tree. We found that we do far less damage by tapping the tree right here with a 3/8 drill and putting an important thing to write down, a couple important things here. Use a 7/16 inch anchor and make sure that the anchor is not screwed all the way in. You may want to, I'll back that up, you may want to back this thing off as the tree grows out. When we get to the plant anatomy lecture, trees, I'll give you a little clue, trees grow up, roots grow down, trees grow out. But once that wood is in place, it doesn't move anywhere. And contrary to popular belief, if you put this, anchor in and the tree grows a foot a year, that anchor doesn't go up the tree. So don't worry about that one. Another thing you want to, if I forget it, is if you're buying, don't put a hook in there. Put an eye in there. And before you go to the woodlot with your drill and your eyes, weld the eye shut. If you don't, and we use 12.5 gauge high tensile wire, some of you have built fence here, you can put an inordinate amount of pressure on that 12.5 gauge. Some of you who've done this already, you can straighten the eye out. And also the idea is you tie back to a side tree with soft wire, 14 gauge wire, and you pull it back to side trees to tighten this up as you're going down through the woodlot. So if a tree falls on your main line, it breaks the side wires and not your main line. You don't want this pulling out, you don't want this straightening out, and you clearly don't want it to break. If you see somebody with a snowmobile or a four-wheeler with standard issue wire cutters on them, you can hurt them. All right? We had somebody in that 7-foot snowfall run into my 3,000 tap Sugarbush with a snow machine, got foundered in there with a snow machine and a spinning belt and destroyed, and you'll see our dry line and our wet line system in a minute. They turned around several times, took down 9 lines with 7 feet of snow on the ground. I had to repair all of that with snowshoes. I was not a happy camper. So you don't want to break your main lines. Those things are put on grade. They are put out there with a transit because you do not want lines that have sags in them. Tubing tools, I've borrowed Joe's. These, if you're putting up tubing for the first time, there are a few things you absolutely need to purchase or make yourself. You can look at this, you can photograph this with your cell phone, and then go home and build it. Joe won't be able to feed his family tonight, but nevertheless, every sugar maker is one of the most frugal people on earth, and so we all look at these things, then go home and build our own. They don't work well, but we build our own. We feel good about it. You'll actually run the thumbnails off from your thumbs if you try putting tubing together without the benefit of one of these tools. You simply cut this, buy yourself a pair of really, really good bypass pruners. I'll give you some suggestions later on a brand that I find that works extremely well. Ace Hardware has them. They're well worth purchasing. Cut this out. Some of these tubing tools have a razor blade on them. I'll talk with you privately about why you don't want to have that and the fact that I only have 4 fingers. Take this out and insert the drop line, which is this structure right here. Joe has some made up over there. Jesse has some up front. That will stay on the tree. We have people in our area who replace these every year. This is called the drop line. There's either a stubby spout here or a spile on there, and minimum is 2 feet on those. Don't go frugal on this. You need to have a drop line long enough so that over the Joe, what do you get? 10 years on them, hopefully. Most people are changing them out in 2 or 3 years, but you want to be able to move that around the tree up and down so that you're spreading out your tap zone on the tree. Main lines, lateral lines are these lines coming from tree to tree to tree. Keep those minimum. I aim for 3, maximum 5 taps per lateral 5/16 inch line. In the old days, we used to put 20 or 30 of them on. It just doesn't work. Unless you've gone to 3/16 inch tubing. I'm not a proponent of 3/16 inch tubing. I can talk with you later about that. I'd go with 5/16, and I'd keep the number of taps per lateral line as short as you can. Short, straight, downhill, get it out of there as quickly as possible. This is a gravity system. This is a place where, oh, my wife does not understand why we have 13 bulk milk tanks. I'm anticipating getting cows in old age or something like that. But she calls it the place where milk tanks go to die. Stainless steel milk tanks make great collecting vessels in the woods. This was a complete gravity system, no vacuum, a lot of fall, and everything goes by gravity into that collecting system next to a stream, which helps keep it cold. My system, my main system, is what is referred to as a wet-dry line. The top line is vacuum. The bottom line, the wet line, is 1¼ inch black plastic, food-grade plastic, food-grade plastic, not sewer-grade plastic. You have to be careful of the regrind that is in this. My lateral line's going to the back. I made a mistake. I went with 3/4. I should have gone with 1. Don't ever, I don't care if you're only tapping 25 trees, go with a 1/2 inch line. Someday, your spouse will let you get some more taps. You'll need the 3/4 inch line. It heats up too much in a 1/2. You just don't, especially if you're ever going to put vacuum. And what this is doing is this is disseminating the vacuum throughout the system. I have 1,700 feet of main line. You'll see a map in a minute going under the working land, and about 2 miles of double line going the full length of the woods, and then herringbones, this one going back to the west, and all of my 5/16 laterals are coming into that. No lateral line is longer than 90 feet. Keep them short and keep the number of main lines. I've got 1,700 feet up through the woods. I have 17 main lines going, or lateral lines going to the west, 100 feet apart. That maximizes the amount of vacuum that goes back to each of the trees and empties the sap out. Now, another reason for having a 2-line system is that we get cold weather, just like Wisconsin. Not usually as cold as when they invited me up there, but nevertheless, if this line happens to freeze overnight, even though I leave my vacuum on 24 hours a day during the sugar season, if it cranks down to 10 above 0 or below 0, I will shut it down. But if it's 25 or above Fahrenheit, I run my vacuum pumps night and day. I want my lines empty. If it freezes, it takes too long for it to thaw out before you get vacuum to the back of your sugar bush. If this happens to freeze, you get a sap run. You will get sap that will come up, and the vacuum line is food grade. It will substitute during a heavy freeze up or a problem. It will run down the vacuum line into the releaser at the base of the collecting system. Now, some of you may not, Troy, can you kill the lights altogether for this one slide, please? This is a satellite photograph of my woodlot. The road is here, the power system is here, my vacuum pumps are here, my hard power is here, and my RO is here. The yellow line in addition to being constrained to 35 minutes, in July I lost my voice. I destroyed my larynx, and so this is not going to be a good thing if my voice goes completely. For somebody who talks for a living, this is not a good thing. This is under the working land. So we buried this. I only had 18 feet of fall from here to here, and this is 1,700 feet. So you had to have your tiling machine, and we ditched it, and then we put those two wet and dry lines in there by hand, graded them, put a tracer line in, and did all that by hand. From here to the top of the woods, there's about 60 feet of fall. So my main lines, that double wet and dry line, is this one running up through. These lateral lines, every 100 feet, run throughout the entire woodlot. Between these red lines, if you can see those, between the red lines are the 5/16 inch laterals. And what I've done is I run them, there's no line on these red ones that runs to the south, which is down. I never tap a tree, even if it's a foot from that red line going back to the west, which is this way. You never tap. So if I have a tree come down, or I need to take firewood out, or I need to get in there with the four-wheeler to repair something, I can come down the road on the west side of the woods and run down the south side. You'd be amazed how difficult it is to get a fallen tree, especially in your way up here, out to a roadway. So every line runs to the north, and they run straight. And remember, these are the ones that are no longer than 90 feet. So you always have a 10-foot alley on the south side of that lateral line going back to the west. That's everybody totally confused? We can turn the lights back on now if you want to. That way I can see who's asleep. Here's the mistake. Remember I talked about it? You want to weld this puppy shut, all right? Do not leave that open. I guarantee you, if a tree falls on this, pulls it forward, it will open that eye. So make sure that you weld those shut while you're still in the shop. In syrup making, timing is everything. You do not want sap to sit around. You don't want it to sit in your gathering tanks. You don't want it in your lines. Sap is sterile when it comes out of the tree. It begins to degrade the second it goes through the spile into the drop line. There's no way you can clean those lines bacteriologically. It's actually not bacteria that spoils sap. It's a yeast, it's a fungus, and it begins to degrade. That's what's giving you a great deal of the color in the syrup at the end of the process. The longer the sap is sat, usually the darker the syrup is going to be. Usually it's the greater the maple flavor. And so many of your customers are going to want dark or amber, which used to be medium, or dark, or extra dark syrup, which used to be used for cooking or flavoring meats or tobacco or things like that. Our customers, about 85% of our customers want the flavor. They want dark amber syrup, or dark syrup. No, it's not dark amber anymore, or amber. Very, very few. In fact, I don't sell any golden. I save all of the golden, or what used to be called fancy or light amber syrup. I save that for my cream and for my sugar and for my own table. There, I talked about AT, automatic transmission, hydraulic pails, whatever. Sap ice, if you're doing buckets, we don't have a lot of time to talk about that. You can heave it or leave it. It doesn't matter to me. It keeps the sap cold. It is water. There's not much sugar in it. I would tend to get rid of it and throw it away. These are old pails. They're things of beauty if you want to look at them. This is 50, that isn't even 50-50. This is pure lead solder. All right? Wheeling buckets, if you got to buy an old bucket, get a wheeling bucket. They're probably the safest. They're galvanized. The bad thing about wheeling buckets, this one's been washed so many times. Jesse scrubbed this one out when he was a kid, and you know, he wore out more brushes and took the galvanizing right off the bottoms of the pails. These are sap pails. You used to have to carry those puppies through the woods. They're Turniplate. Those are Turniplate, which is lead-coated sheet iron. I would clearly not use them. I tell you, if you've got 500 of them in your sugar house, you want to get rid of them on Maple Weekend or when you have visitors, put them out, get somebody to paint a painting on them. You can sell, the rustier the bucket, I kid you not, as God is my witness, we will sell the rustiest buckets at Maple Weekend for twice what I could get from a sugar maker buying those things. They don't even have to be painted. They want rusty buckets. I can't sell a wheeling bucket. I can't sell these. They don't want those. Oh no, they want these old rusty puppies, and they make knickknacks and put dry flowers and other stuff in. As long as you're not putting sap in them. Galvanized tanks, same thing. This is an old Grimm upside down English tin. Great tank. Jesse's the way he is because he drank syrup out of that tank. So, and this is also a G.H. Grimm galvanized tank. They do rust. You could actually, and I can't find my 1-quart can of lead paint. It's got to be 150% lead or something like that, you know. And you painted the inside of your tanks with that. Wooden buckets. If it's a white painted wooden bucket, that's white lead. That's not white paint. Give it to your neighbors if you don't like them. I hate squirrels so much. And I did this talk a week ago in Pennsylvania. The only acceptable lead, as far as I'm concerned, is this that you see here, and this is the target. Jesse's got a Boone & Crockett 186 that he got, what, 2 years ago. I have a squirrel hanging in my bedroom, you know. I just dislike these things so intensely. They've cost me a lot. So I thought that was kind of artistic for me to put those lead shotgun shells, especially the first day of hunting season. If you're going to buy anything used and it's English tin, Turniplate, copper, anything, even lead soldered or soldered stainless steel pans. 1991, Joe, right? 91, I believe, Leader Evaporator Company was the first to build stainless steel pans that used lead-free solder. By 95, LaPierre, D&G, CDL, all the rest of them had followed suit. Shortly thereafter, every pan, you look at the pan that Joe's got back there on display, those are all MIG'd, TIG'd, no lead whatsoever. You don't want any lead in your operation. You can buy at the hardware store. Don't get the little swabs. Get the, and this is the only one that I found that really works well. It's about the size of a short lead pencil, same diameter. It's a swab. You break it. It's like those ammonia inhalants if you're fainting. They look a lot like that. You touch it on that lead seam on that bucket or on the side of your pan or whatever. If it turns red, you got lead. The brighter the red, the more the lead that's in there. Do not use it. Sap sitting in that gathering tank will leach out lead. If you're going to use something like that, get the sap in it and out of it. Don't let it warm up in there. Another thing for those of you who are veteran sugar makers, show of hands. When you finish for the day, you've run out of sap. You shut it down. How many of you leave the sweet in the pan? You know what I'm talking about? You finish for the day. You can't drain the pan out because your arch is still hot. So you leave the near syrup. You draw the syrup off. You leave the near syrup in the pan because you're going to make more syrup tomorrow. Show of hands. Come on. We've got a few intrepid and one dealer. Few people who are really, truly honest. Thank you. You're in a place of worship. You'll get your reward in heaven. The rest of you are lying through your teeth. All right? We've all done it, and that's called sweet. Don't do it. You shouldn't even do it with your stainless steel pans. Clean those things out, put permeate water or something in there, get the sugar sand off from your pans, start out clean the next morning. I still keep sweet in my stainless steel pans. I shouldn't do it. You clearly shouldn't do it if you've got any lead at all in there, because it will leach the lead out of the sugar sand that's in your pan. It will clean the lead off from the corners of those pans. It'll go into solution. You'll draw it into that batch of syrup. You should be selling that syrup in Vermont. Sap processing, quickly. Reverse osmosis, you can see Troy and Jess and Dave have got a small RO machine out in the sugar house set up out in front of the Mound Conference Center. It's the way to go. If you're thinking about buying a larger evaporator, Joe may disagree with me on this. If you're thinking about, if you're going to buy a larger evaporator, get it from Joe. But if you're not going to, or you're on the bench between a bigger evaporator and an RO machine, hands down, get the RO machine and downsize your evaporator. Holy Toledo, I only got 5 hours left, he said. I clearly would go with the RO and size it to your evaporator and what your potential number of taps are. We can talk more. I'm sure Joe will talk about RO and his talk. Defoamer, be careful what you use. Joe was telling me before we started here this morning, one of the few confections that I make, value-added products that I make that isn't pure maple. I'm kind of a purist. I don't mix stuff with my cream and my syrup. I want it to be pure maple syrup and not have raspberry or cinnamon or bourbon or other good stuff in it, tasty beverages. But I do like maple-coated peanuts. In fact, you can't eat just one maple-coated peanut. But you got to be careful, particularly today with the peanut allergies that are out there. If you've got equipment that you're using and you're stirring peanuts in it and then go back and make cream in that, you could be putting somebody's life in danger. Be careful also if you're old school and you hang a piece of salt pork in the top of your evaporator, especially if you want to sell honestly to a kosher market. Pork is a no-no in kosher markets. It's also probably not one of the better things to use. There are extremely good defoamers available on the market that work actually better than butter and milk and Crisco and some of the other things, canola oil. Transfer pumps, we're going to talk about those in a minute. One of the few places that clean stainless steel operations, they forget you've got an Oberdorfer pump in your pressure pump, in your filter press. You might have an Oberdorfer, or I'm not picking on Oberdorfer, but they make a really good pump. They're red brass. If you've got brass anywhere in your system, you got lead in your system. You can't make brass without lead. Lead is actually the lubricant that is mixed in the alloy that allows them to machine it. Evaporator pans, I don't care what you use as long as it's food grade. There are all kinds out there. Raised flue, dropped flue. I have a hybrid flue, a combination. There's cross pans, you name it, especially today. I don't know how my colleagues to the left keep up with the industry. The innovation in the industry, I was talking with Jim, I don't know where he is right now, earlier. We don't need to make more syrup. We know how to make syrup. We know how to do it well. What we've got to do, and what we're doing here with you folks, is we need to know how to market it. You know, it's the old adage, us sugar makers are just like dairy farmers, just like corn farmers, just like hog farmers and poultry farmers. When the price of milk goes down, what do? You buy cows. When the price of milk goes up, what do? You buy cows. When the price of syrup goes up, you put on more taps. When it goes down, we add more taps. I'm working on sugar operations where they're adding 750,000 taps per operation. I see Jesse coming this way.
You're getting the hook.
I'm getting the hook. Old pans. That one on the lower right is a pre-World War I sheet iron riveted pan with more lead than you would ever want to know about. That one on the left is English tin. Actually, it's an English tin and a copper with, again, pure lead, not even 50-50. And this is a new completely stainless steel rig that my wife still is not forgiving me for. We'll talk about that later. The brass pumps we've talked about, the filter press we've talked about. Grading your syrup, make sure Jesse gave you a copy of the new grading standards. Use those, sell them, tell people. You know, get rid of the old light, medium, and dark. Geez, what does medium taste like? And people thought light was the diet version, you know, not the color. Make sure that you pack it at 185 degrees minimum, 190 degrees, do not cold pack, and pack in a food grade container. Joe and Carol have got them on sale over there on the side. There's some new innovations we can look at later on. Make sure they're stainless steel. There's a good thing for this. You can target practice with that lead that I had earlier with these galvanized drums. You can take the head out and make illegal burn barrels in them if you'd like. Some people are actually using them in the brewing industry, but we won't go there.
All right. I'm going to have your whole talk online.
That's okay, we're getting there. This one's an important one, especially the last two. And I leave it with this, safety. This was on a tour with 300 sugar makers watching this 84-year-old man who was extremely proud of the log chain hanging down here to mark his straight cut. That had to be a 9-foot blade on that chainsaw. I really like his safety harness here, his chaps, his ear protection. He was so proud of his straight wood piles. Don't do it. Thank you for attending.